could I just say that I did tell Paul the story that I remember you telling me of John's views about some of the confessional advice that was being given.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
So I'll leave it there, but I told Paul briefly that.
Yes, such a long time ago. I'd quite forgotten. I remember meeting him, liking him very much. But I think we met for a meal or something, I think.
But they could, my poor sister, when she recovered, but her faith was completely sort of scarified by the elderly priest in Tisbury. She was undergoing psychiatry, this sister of mine. Always a lifelong Catholic and everything, but going through an unhappy and inappropriate love affair, etc. And she was being treated for this by a very nice Jungian psychiatrist at Salisbury, whom I got on to, Dr. Morgan. And she was coming for Christmas. And she was so conscientious that she said, by the time I've seen Dr. Morgan, I shall be late for confession. And I must go to confession on Christmas Eve. So will you ask I think it's Father Mortland, or one time I was Father.
And Father Payne, perhaps?
I don't think it was Father Payne. I think it was when the lay too was still there.
Father Mortland.
And will you ask them to stay open for me?
Yes.
And she came off the train and went straight to the church. Started to confess. She'd been going through agony, this poor girl. And she'd just been having a sort of healing time with the Jungian. And the priest said, "Oh, you're in a state of mortal sin. I can't give you any absolution for this and for this grave sin that you're doing." And my sister came home in absolute shreds. And I said, "Darling, take no notice."
Hard old people like you.
No, but I said, who are you confessing to? You've spent the afternoon with Dr. Morgan, who is a skilled Jungian practitioner, and you've been as truthful as you could possibly be. Who are you telling? For goodness sake. Don't go and say I'm sorry to say, silly and untrained person who's just returning the ball as he knows it. I said, God's not like that, I said to my sister.
I'm sure John Thompson would have had the greatest sympathy with me. I remember.
Well, it was awful. Because in a sense, you see, if you're a very good young person and so on, it's easier, but I think that, I don't know, but do you think, I think often people are very much harmed by this kind of thing.
Well, I hadn't been to confession for years.
I don't think I can stay in the room with that.
You're a proper one.
Well, I last went to Michael Hollings, and that was a very, very sort of healing.
Do you know, when I came up to Oxford to see a person, Paul, who will be in these letters, who I remember about John, who John put me onto and said, "Can you befriend this chap?" was when Hollings was chaplain.
Yes.
And we came in the evening with you as I brought this young chap, John Hartigan, and I always remember having a
we went to see him, did we?
Yes.
At the Old Palace.
Yes.
When you're in your Oxford period.
Yes. Well, I'm just reading a book about him at the moment, which is really I ought to lend you.
Don't worry, there's lots of time.
He's such a wonderful, such a wonderful man.
And John Thompson actually came down here to visit?
No, he never did. It was always one of the sad things. I'd always hoped to get him to come down.
Yes.
His two stepsons, wards, both came down. I think I brought one of them to see you a few times, Matthias Matthias Leber. And John, for one reason or another, never got to come down here.
Yes.
But I always remember the morning he died, or that I heard the news from Sebastian, I came across to see you, because...
how long ago was that?
That must have been 1966 or 7?
65.
65.
Well, I must have seen him fairly soon before he died then.
It was when you were doing all your agronomy work and going over to the States.
That's right, yes. Well, I'd obviously...
You met him in New York or something?
Yes, I did. Yes.
I gave you an introduction.
Yes,
that's right.
Yes. It must have been about 64. It can't have been before that, so it must have been very, very soon before he died, very shortly before he died.
Where did you meet in New York?
Oh, I was only staying there. I mean, I was staying in a hotel, I think.
Yes, so he came. So John Thompson came to you.
Yes, or we met at a restaurant or something.
Yeah.
Yes. Mm.
You never went up to. He lived in Riverdale in the Bronx.
Oh yes. No, I never went
up
there.
It was the time when he was very, very friendly with Dorothy Day.
Yes.
Oh yes.
And I always remember your daughter Marianne, who was going to the States, and I told her she should go and visit Dorothy Day's Catholic worker
Set up.
or
Yes.
whatever. And I always remember her, your saying, reporting her as having said, it was really weird. There were all these sort of weird.
She did go and
dropouts
see her.
druggies and
Yes.
down and outs.
Mm.
But Dorothy Day was full of that and had this sort of thing that you just take all the scourings and give them a sandwich and a bowl of soup sort of thing.
Yes. Rather like Michael Hollings.
Yes, and of course Dick Shepherd and the Anglicans and people, I mean, that's a wonderful thing to do. But what I've always found difficult, and perhaps you can explain to me, is the sort of act of getting the scouring, giving him a bath and a coat and a meal. I mean, at the end of the day, what people need are relationships. And I always, to some extent, blame myself of things that you've done and not followed them through. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, of course.
I mean, this seems to me, and yet there's only so much time. Of course, Michael Hollings was very wonderful that he gave his time.
He had so much, yes, gave his whole...
Well, that's the thing that comes out in oddments in these letters that I've just had
Time.
again. John saying, can you just try and give some friendship so that the person feels there's somebody interested in
And goes on being interested. It's not.
Yeah.
I tell you who was marvellous at that, and that was Jenny Fives. She gave more time to more people than you could possibly imagine. If you look...
What his psychiatric colleagues say is that John Thompson was really patient with cases which others had given up on.
Yes.
And that he had a marvellous, just his presence and time, and he would build up a relation of
Perseverance.
trust and,
Yes.
and perhaps touch as well.
Yes.
And so that cases who were just otherwise completely inaccessible.
Yes.
And
Wonderful.
hopeless,
Yes.
I know Michael. He almost killed himself in the end. Because if you're available all the time to too many people,
He had
day and night.
gathering this increasingly severe diabetes.
Oh yes, I think it's the most draining thing. This is the thing I always used to say when I struggled at the chalk face, that you see all these Whitehall bureaucrats lay down how it shall be done and what the deemed rewards for teachers are. They don't realise that responding to young humans between the ages of 8 and 12 for 6 hours is the most draining thing.
Yes.
And I always remember Gilly's father saying, yes, I mean, we Dons have it absolutely as cushy as could be because we teach about 1/6 of the time is pupil contact time,
Yes.
and with you it's exactly reversed.
Yes.
5/6 is pupil contact time.
and
Yes.
you've got intelligent people. I mean, Richard's housemaster at Westminster said, I've had the only decent thing I did in my life, but quite untrue, was a couple of years I taught in Jamaica. But, I've taught in a beautiful public school with very intelligent children. I've lived in a Queen Anne house. All the children are very clever. Their parents control them. I mean, what is all this about? I don't feel I think I'm fortunate, but the person who really teaching those sort of. But you, Jeremy, are the 8 to 12s the most difficult? Or surely the adolescents are the real problems.
They weren't as difficult in my day. I think there was still a degree of
Disrespect.
respect and so forth.
Yeah,
I'm sure adolescence can be more trying. But, ideas, could we get back to what Paul wants to try and establish?
Yes. What do you remember about John? What did you like about him?
You want to talk about him?
Yes. Well, I'm afraid I can't really be very helpful because we only met that once. And Jeremy seems to remember more of the conversation than I do.
What was she concerned about? Did you talk about the church or?
I expect we did.
Was it you with your story about confession and everything?
Yeah.
Came via you?
Yes.
Gave me that story.
Yes.
He gave me the story.
Yes. I've got it.
I can't remember when Vatican II was. No,
because he had known John the 23rd, hadn't he?
Had he? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So we must have talked about that. Yes. And we might well have talked about Humanae Vitae, but I don't know what the date of it was. No, this is a thing that I felt very strongly about, and no doubt he would too.
Yeah, but I remember, as Jeremy does, you coming back and saying this marvellous man was horrified at the damage that was done in the confessional.
Oh, yes. Yes. Yes.
I remember you told me that.
Yes.
Because I couldn't have made it up.
No.
And the fact that the priests had no training for this kind of work, really.
No. Are you a Catholic?
No, I'm not.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I'm sorry to be so hopeless, because I didn't even know that he was concerned with this following the Nuremberg trials. Yes.
And
he was the Canadian official representative.
Yeah.
He was the British official representative, but he was in the Royal Canadian Air Force. It's very complicated.
Oh, yes.
And he was also a special delegate with Lester Pearson, who was worked in the Canadian Foreign Ministry.
Yes.
And I'll show you some of and he visited the Vatican, and he wrote very, very full accounts about his visits to the Vatican.
And when he met John the 23rd, was it?
That was much better.
He would have, I think, he met Pius the 12th.
Quite.
He met, it's very interesting, he may have known 3 popes, because John was, 23rd was at that time papal nuncio in Paris.
Right.
Oh,
and
yes.
he came, I think, to Eau Vive. But also, John Thompson, he went to Krakow in Eastern Europe.
Oh, really?
Where our current Pope
was Archbishop.
Yes.
Yes.
And he was very, very concerned about the communist takeover and thought that he had a special mission to support the Catholic youth in Poland.
Yes.
At a time of really world crisis.
Yes.
So that when he was offered a position at the University of Ottawa, which itself was a Catholic university, which was just being established in 47, 48, he said, "No, I feel that I have to stay in Europe and in Poland." And I think his taking the position in UNESCO may have had something to do with that, and being in Germany, where you're sort of can keep in touch with what's going on there.
Yeah.
So he, it was a very interesting. It was a really interesting.
What did he make of the Nuremberg trials?
Well, he said that. Why just bring, in this case there was the Nuremberg medical trial, which he was particularly concerned about.
Right.
And he was concerned about human experiments and the atrocities which were carried out. And of course some of the victims were Catholic priests. There was a Catholic priest, gypsies, Jews, children, many children.
Yes.
And he said, well, he said, really what we ought to do is document everything that happened. Don't just bring 23 people to trial. It's really artificial. After all, some people who carried out will no longer be alive. And so he had this great scheme to document everything that went on. And his assistant was Clement Freud. He did a vast collection of war crimes documents, which were then taken over to London.
Yes.
To be looked at.
Yes.
And he also had the idea of, well, what should we do in terms... He felt his own career as a medical researcher, how could he go on with research at a time when there was so much that was wrong in the world?
Yes.
And so he felt, well, he had to put that to one side. And he thought a lot about how you should develop a medical curriculum without animal experiments, for example. And he was in touch with Catholic theologians to have a view about medical teaching without... It's a very interesting thing. So that there's so many different levels. There's a spiritual... There's the literary side,
and ethical too,
and an ethical side.
Yes,
and of course there is, I think, a human, sort of spiritual side.
Yes,
as well.
Yes,
so there's many.
And what is this tape then?
Tape was it's just so that if you, how can I say it? It's just as I write then and put together the things for writing. I just play it to my.
Oh, I see. It's a tape you made.
It's a tape.
He's taping you.
Taping me? Oh, I see. It's going on all the time. Well,
I think it's a terribly good thing to do. One of Edmund's cousins, one night at dinner, gave the most wonderful account of her life in Poland and concentration camps in Siberia. And it went on for ages, and she never talked about it.
Yeah.
And then I said, oh, God, why haven't I got the tape recorder here? And then she was going off to stay with another cousin, so I gave her my tape recorder. But she couldn't get her to talk again. The moment had passed somehow.
Yes.
Because it was so interesting. I mean, some people talk more readily than others.
Yes, this was how she'd been deported to Siberia in 1939. And it was really...
I remember
she was
constantly...
put in... But when they arrived in Kazakhstan, the huts were all completely buried in snow. But after a bit, somebody in charge of the camp heard that she was a trained expert on fruit growing, which she was. And so she was put into a group of Russian scientists who had been commissioned by the government to experiment on growing strawberries in winter. And it was pure Solzhenitsyn. Quite amazing. I wish we'd...
Well, I kept on, I remember that dinner party, because I kept on saying, tell us some more, what happened next, go on. And she did. But I think Anne probably wasn't so good at making her talk. And, we were all sitting around the table and drinking and everything. And
I don't know if we got a machine like this. I can't remember.
Yes, of course we have.
Have we? Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's a slightly bigger machine. Of course we have.
I always bought one of those because you can conceal them, or even smaller one.
Oh, yes.
Because I wanted to clandestinely record some committee meetings, which is totally illegal, yes. But as a great friend of mine was doing it, he said, you can then go back afterwards and think, did this person really say this or that? But you mentioned communism and John's feelings about harm that was being done to youth, or how they're perhaps being taken over in Europe. I always remember Sebastian saying that he was once travelling with John in France. This was before he came over to study in...
Which Sebastian are we talking?
Sebastian Littman, who was...
Not Sebastian Moore, no.
and Sebastian went to Oxford first, and then went to Edinburgh. Yeah, and John brought him to Oxford. I forget which college he was at, but travelling in France once, they found a ticket man at a station being extremely obstructive and rude, and John said afterwards, "That's communists for you. The place is riddled with communists."
Well, minor French bureaucrats can be very tiresome.
Even if they're not communists.
Yeah, yes.
I was interested in asking you about the war trials. Kathy's just given me a newly written American book about the whole sort of Mitford thing, and a lot of it is gossip. But the whole thing about them in Germany and with Hitler and everything is, I think, absolutely fascinating.
It's a curious, well, I mean, parting of the ways, really, because
and then the other sister was a
fascinated
communist,
and the other was a communist,
yes,
wasn't
that
it?
was
So
a
that
great strength of character.
But I was telling Paul, one of the stories that this chap Sebastian told me, that John, I mean, you know all this background, had to interview all the people who were arraigned for the Nuremberg trial, particularly as he was a doctor, and he went to see Goering. I got the impression from what I recollect that each of the Allies sent their own representatives.
Yes, that's how it was.
And John did it for Canada or for Britain. And Goering offered him a photo and said, "I'll sign it because this will be very valuable for you in years to come." And John said, "No, I can't do that."
Yes.
Perhaps he was very sly, Goering, and he was the sort of leader of the pack at the trial, and he upset the American prosecution terrifically. He was a very, very astute person. Yes, and it was really his last great
rather
battle.
like Milosevic.
Yes, yes. Absolutely. And of course he had this strychnine, or what is it, arsenic pill hidden in his mouth.
But there's sort of efforts to restore the Mosely faction to favour. Well, I never knew that Hitler was their best man to Mosely and Diana, and they were married from Magda Goebbels' flat at the party in Berlin given by the Goebbels. And yet sort of efforts, in a sense perhaps they were just hopelessly naive and everything, but the idea that they were sort of not great chums is clearly true.
I mean, it could well have been that the Germans were being deliberately targeted deliberate people whom they thought may have been susceptible and put on the best sort of face, really. And of course, you tell people what they want to hear, and so they may have been deliberately sort of
playing up to it. And of course, the problem in the 30s was that there were these two ideologies, and if you were poor, you became communist. If you were middle class, you thought Mussolini was absolutely splendid.
What's so interesting about John Thompson, he was in Germany in 32, 33, just when the Nazis took over. So he would have seen how it actually was. And then he was in Madrid.
In the Spanish War.
Just before, as far as I can work out, just before the Spanish Civil War. There was a Spanish physiologist, Cajal, and he had the idea of translating Cajal's neurophysiology. Is a very important physiologist. So he was there just when Spain was about to explode. And then he comes right into the heart of the Anglo-American war effort.
Yes.
And he's there when the concentration camps are open as well, at Belsen. So that he's somehow, and I think it then goes on later when he's, after all, in the Bronx, when the Bronx is about to, on the verge. It's as if he has the sense of, these are places which are going to, Yes, in some sort of, which are going to erupt. It's if it's there before they erupt. I think it was again with the Bronx when he worked there.
Yes.
He worked at this. I think quite a sort of tough context in which he worked, and he had a real sense of the victims and the underprivileged. But clearly enjoying the best things in life as well.
That sounds just like Jessica Mitford.
I mean, is that
and yet
fair?
she was terrific at what she did. But I think that's probably the way it is, actually. I mean, after all, when people worked looking after refugees, when there's shortage of food, they're always told they must feed themselves first, because if they collapse, then they won't be able to help anybody. This I've read in accounts of people working
in Africa.
Yes, after terrible famines and disasters of all kinds, the team who are alleviating the famine. I mean, sort of in a sense, Christianity suggests you should suffer with them. There's no good you collapsing, because then there'll be nobody to unload the wagons and see that they don't all tear each other apart. Does that sound awfully sort of cynical? But do you think it's true? It must happen. There must be for doctors always this kind of ethical problem.
When did you, Paul, get involved in the sort of Thompson story?
The Thompson story.
Well, it grew really. As I say, this war crimes investigator Keith Mant planted a seed that here was someone who was absolutely brilliant and who had a profound understanding and did so much at the time, and that's clear from the archives. But the question always really was, well, where was he born? Where did he come from? Oh, and he keeps on writing the Canadians. What's he doing writing the Canadians? How are they involved? And why is he giving the Spenders address the whole time? He wanted to be demobilized.
Was that a result of Spain? Because after all, Natasha Jimenez, her people were Spanish, highbrow Spanish Republicans, weren't they?
No. Natasha was Russian,
And I'm thinking of the other one.
No,
Stephen went to the international.
Who am I thinking of that world?
that was Natasha Jimenez.
Yes, and she married Asquith, did she?
Yes.
That's right. I was confused, the two Natashas.
No. And she was called Natasha Litvin.
Natasha Litvin.
She was a pianist.
Yes, of course she was.
Yes.
Lovely person, lovely.
She's still alive, is
Yes,
she?
yes.
Didn't she? Wasn't her house burnt down?
Yeah,
Yes.
it was. And I spoke to her on the telephone about 4 or 5 months ago when she said, "Can I introduce Paul Weindling to you?" And I said, "Yeah, okay." And I was so pro Natasha because I finally got back this book edited by Matthias's mother, which I'll show you, which I drew out one of the documents, about people who opposed Nazism.
I would very much like to see that.
See that.
Actually.
And
Is Spender now dead?
yes, he
Stephen,
died about
yeah.
5 years ago.
Last time we saw him was at one of Charles's exhibitions,
Yes.
which I can't ever remember. What the date of anything?
No.
Sorry, Paul, you were
No,
more au fait with all that.
Well, I was just sort of. It was just how and what nationality was he? And
Spender.
Who?
John Thompson.
Thompson.
And it,
Oh,
just
yes.
to sort of trying to sort of
Place him.
and but
historically.
also it's clear that he did do for this so much in terms of the ethical and evaluation of what these ghastly human experiments that the Germans carried
Which is
out.
this is your medical history bit.
That's my
That's
specific
that's your
interest.
biscuit. Yes.
That's what drew me specifically there. But it's clearly he had he's leaving medical research and going into UNESCO is just well, why did he do that and so on. So that there were a lot of questions And then it was just piece by piece. Some answers have
Where was
cropped
he
up.
born, in fact?
In Mexico, in Mexico.
Oh, really?
As far as I can work out, his father must have been Scottish, but working
Railway
for
engineer.
a railway engineer.
Oh.
That's what Sebastian told me.
Oh, yes.
Another amazing
Thompson
Thompsonism.
is very Scottish, yeah.
They were there when one of the revolutions happened, and they were taken into custody and quite literally threatened with execution. That's, I don't know why.
Family.
Yeah, and they got by. They weren't executed. But I always remember Sebastian being quite gleeful about that story.
That was about 1906, wasn't it? There was when the left wing took over in Mexico.
Right. John Thompson's born 1905, but it's absolutely that his parents. I mean, I'm sure that.
Were they American, the parents? Yes.
Well, I think they were Scottish.
Or they were Scottish
They were
engineers.
Scottish engineers.
Yes.
There may have been a connection to Shell Oil. Is that possible? Milton thought so, but railway engineer sounds very likely.
That's what I recall.
He's called, in the one document I've seen, he calls his father a mathematical consultant. And he clearly went to school in Switzerland and then near Edinburgh, at a public school near Edinburgh.
Betis.
Betis.
Loretto.
Or
I don't know.
Loretto.
I must
Betis
find
is where
out.
Mr. Blair went, and lots of other people.
Yes, I must write. That's something that I need to establish.
And where did he train as a doctor? Which university?
Very interesting. He did his first studies in Stanford in California,
Right.
but then went to Edinburgh to study medicine. Seems to have also spent some time in Oxford, some time in Freiburg in Germany, and some time in Madrid, and took a teaching post in Swarthmore
In the USA.
in the USA, where W.H. Auden also arrived
Yeah.
at that
This
time.
was the war period.
This was in about 1932.
Quite early.
So while he was at medical school in Edinburgh, he was also teaching at Swarthmore. He had this transatlantic commuting. I've got some letters I've brought, actually, which I found about how he came to be hired in Swarthmore. It's extraordinary. And friendship with Auden seems to have been a lifelong link, that there seems to have been some bond between them, but it's...
He was very fascinating.
Did
you ever meet him with the Stearns, Jeremy?
Yes, I was going to. It's one of the things I was going to tell Paul. One of my recollections that.
Or Thompson, rather than Auden, you met them together.
Yeah. No, I met Auden at the Stearns. Gillian and I
Right.
went across one morning and had a
So
drink. It must have been
I
in
remember meeting with
the
Auden.
late 70s or early 80s. And I remember Auden saying, I was there and introduced as a person who had known John Thompson, talked to him a bit. And he was a bit dismissive, I thought. He said he was a romancier.
This is Auden.
Yes,
that's
yes.
interesting, isn't it?
Mind you, Auden was on his 4th or 5th martini.
Large double gin.
I think that there were things in John Thompson's life that sound fantastic, but I've always been able to document. So that perhaps that's what...
Well, it's
It
too
was
late.
as if
for the
it was a
Stearns. I
fantastic,
did.
incredible, a life that was slightly beyond belief. But
Totally.
so that in that extent he was a remote, and perhaps also in terms of his character, but also it was also true. It was him.
Jimmy Stern
Yeah.
told me, and none of his other, contacts I had intimate friendships with, like the two boys, Matthias and Sebastian, never mentioned this to me, I don't think. But it was Jimmy who insisted that he was in an aircraft that came down in the North Atlantic once during the war and spent some time in a life raft, and it was fabulous that they survived.
Well, this is Thompson.
Thompson.
How
Really?
interesting.
Yeah.
Really?
Absolutely.
Because he was in the Canadian Air Force.
Canadian Air Force.
Yes.
He was in the Canadian Air Force Medical Service.
That's right.
yeah.
He volunteered very quickly for the Royal Canadian Air Force because he was working in Boston.
Rather like Esmond Romilly, of course, was in the Canadian Air Force too. Jessica Mitka's husband.
Right.
That sort of thing about being Canadians was great.
In the war.
Well, the Canadians were terrifically important in terms of the sort of
training and everything.
Training and physiological research, which is what John Thompson
Quite
did.
remarkable people.
And particularly this high altitude stuff. And he did a lot of experiments on himself, although his lungs were very weak. So that, I mean, he pushed himself very, very hard.
To the limit, really.
Was he always such a smoker? My recollection of him is that he was 20, 40 a day per man.
Really?
In
Never
Oxford,
without.
he was always rolling his own, and I remember staying with him, as I did a few times when he lived in this little flat, Little Clarendon, that he would talk and he'd say, I'm just rolling up tomorrow's supply of fags in a machine.
Little Clarendon.
Little Clarendon Street. It's all gone. It's all been modernised. I had some super recollections of that.
Gosh.
It used to be little shops and bistros, and it's all been properly developed.
Oh dear, it's between Oxford University, the main offices, and
Yes.
Somerville College on the other
That's
side.
right, yes. And the Agricultural Economics Research Institute moved there. But how did he come into your life? Through your mother, was it?
Yes, my mother said, why don't I ask my friend, John Thompson,
Yes.
to be your godfather?
Oh, yes.
And we duly arranged it, and he was. And
Yes.
I showed Paul the little sort of, your little card you have, turn up at the Westminster Cathedral on such and such a day.
Where were you
and
received,
your godparent is
actually?
John Thompson. I was received in Warder Chapel.
You were, but he was here.
No.
He didn't turn up for that.
No.
No.
I didn't know him then. It
Oh,
was
I
when,
see.
a year later, I was
yes.
due to be confirmed.
Oh,
My
yes.
mother, meanwhile, through
Yes.
Natasha Spender, had met him and said,
Yes.
he's the most amazing bloke. My mother
I
went to
see.
stay at this place which Paul may have visited in France, called Eau Vive, where he was involved with the French Dominicans and
Rings a bell.
got very, very involved in the sort of the lay professional's role in the
Yes.
church, in healing, etc.
Yes.
And the French Dominicans he found very agreeable,
Yeah, yes.
I think.
There was
They
a
had some
famous.
pretty crazy radicals,
Well,
didn't they?
yes, well, there was a famous Polish one called Żywuski.
Oh,
Yes. But where is Eau Vive? It
it's
rings a
outside
bell.
Paris, at Soissy, where St. Edmund Rich,
Yes.
who was another Archbishop of Canterbury,
Yes.
had a row with the English monarchy, retired, and I think he died there.
Oh, really?
I think
Yes.
it was pre Beckett or post Beckett. I can't remember.
Pretty early on.
Had a
Yes.
row with the king.
Yes.
And went there and died there. But John Thompson says, as you will see in some of these letters, that it was the place where he felt he had the happiest, most fulfilling period.
Yeah.
Things like Tese, are they anything to do with this kind of modern?
They might well come out of it. You know that chap, that Canadian,
Vanier.
Vanier.
Vanier,
And now,
a little bit in contact, but this idea of a healing community, a therapeutic
Is that
community.
Tese?
No.
well,
No.
John Vanier, if that's his
He
name,
gets
has
some-
something to do with the Tesier community business, doesn't he? But Sebastian Littman was always very, very complimentary about him, saying how he loved to introduce me, and I think Sebastian, while he was studying in Britain, met him a time or two, either by popping over to France to see him, because he is a French Canadian, wasn't he? He came from a French Canadian family.
Yes, he gets a mention in this book about Michael Hollings, with whom he was obviously Jean Vanier.
So there's a book about Michael Hollings.
Yes.
Okay. Well, that I should try and look at.
Lend it to him.
No, don't lend it to me, but I can.
You can gut it quickly.
No, how can I say it? These things lead to. I then sort of, look at the books and so on, and see, are there any archives? Is there any correspondence? Are there any letters? It's sort of, they provide clues and leads, which I then try and bring into things. So that, thank you. I'm grateful, actually.
But your great friend Thompson was also a friend of Michael Hollings, was he?
What's he?
I don't know. I'm simply saying that when Edmund was working a lot at Oxford,
you met him.
I went up specially to contact this young chap, 18, 20, who John had as a patient. And in one of the letters it says, I'm going away and I've hardly had time to do enough for this chap. Would you befriend him if you can? And another thing, John sent him to this place, which you perhaps come across the name of, George Lywood in Kent, who ran a kind of place for delinquent.
Yeah.
I think they were all boys.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Who was that great friend of your Chicksgrove friend? Sir Container.
Ronnie.
Ronnie.
Yes.
Ronnie's friend, Michael Burns.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Michael Burns wrote a biography called Mr. Lywood's Answer.
He's
Because-
rather wonderful. We were talking about him only yesterday,
Yes.
because he comes into this book about the Mitfords.
Oh, yes.
And he was
Michael Burns.
Yes.
Oh,
he
he's
was
a fabulous chap.
he was a
wasn't
fabulous.
Yes.
He was captured with Ronnie
Well, there
at
was
the
a-
Dieppe
And they were all-
raid, wasn't
yes,
he?
and they were all
He
in
was on
Golders.
television, a program about Saint-Nazaire. I don't know if you happened to
I
see
saw it. I just saw that clip.
it. Oh, yes.
Yes, yes.
I wish we could.
He
see,
must
now-
be
He lives in
very,
North
very
Wales,
old
which is
now.
rather...
But he lives in North Wales, which is annoying.
Well, I'm
I
sure
wonder
he-
whether Giles knows how one could get in touch
Yes.
with him.
Yes, he does.
Because we used to see him quite often, because he was Ronnie's great friend.
Came down for Ronnie's record.
We knew
yeah,
Michael
Yes.
when
I
we were
wanted
undergraduates.
to see him.
And then I went back to Oxford in 62.
He was lovely, Mickey Byrne, awfully nice man.
And he was chaplain then.
But he wrote
He's
this
a chaplain.
amazing
At
Yes.
Oxford,
book
yes.
about
Yes.
the man who John Thompson
About 1960
admired so
to
much,
69,
George
I
Lywood.
think.
Right.
I think it was George Lywood, who
George Lywood.
ran an extraordinary institution, and in fact he was so respected in these circles of sort of delinquent treatment that he was allowed to run it entirely in his way, and this is what the book is about. And
Can you remember who's the publisher of Mickey Byrne's book?
no, but it's called Mr. Lywood's Answer, and I got it from the county library in the 60s here in Wiltshire.
If it's not been pulped, I say gloomily.
It won't be pulped. I mean, anybody connected with sort of in-depth social work, etc.,
Would know about
that
it.
was his...
would know about it, I'm sure.
Because we were talking about him only yesterday, and saying we'd love to see him again.
I thought he
Yeah,
was
so-
a charming chap.
Bar a run out.
Awfully nice.
Has actually. It's
Do keep it, because I have a lot of them.
I wonder where Lando knows where he is. If we're going to London next.